A week ago, on September 11th, 2025, that I finished The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. First, I want to take a moment to very much appreciate this cover. I really love this cover, particularly with the context of the book. And then I want to give some context to reading this book before we get into non-spoilers. I read this as part of a book club at my work. A few friends and I got together. So one of us proposed that we read this book, and I was very much intrigued because I read Left-Handed Darkness before, which I have the review of on this channel. I did not rewatch that review for this, so I'm kind of working off my memory of Left-Handed Darkness for this video. But I loved Left-Handed Darkness, and so I was very excited to hear that there was another Ursula K. Le Guin book, and I went ahead and bought it and joined the book club. We finished the book last week, and we did our book club meeting. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to try to mainly focus on all of my thoughts I had before the book club meeting. I will mention a few things that some of my friends, my peers, mentioned about this book, but I don't want to claim their ideas as mine, so that's why I'm trying to set this distinction. I will definitely bring it up if someone else is the one who said it. So this book is, well, hold on. This video is going to be pretty much a focus of what I noticed with this book, but I definitely want to emphasize that there's a lot to take in about this book. Even though it is super short, this is I'm not going to give a page count, because the page count isn't even realistic with how large this font is. There's just so much empty page. It's a very short book. Despite how short this book is, there's a lot of themes in it, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in non-spoilers, but there's definitely a lot to take in, and I haven't really had the time to fully process it because I've been doing a lot of personal stuff recently. You can see I'm in a new place again. So this video is going to be a lot of my initial thoughts on this book, but I'd be very curious to do a reread in a year, maybe after I reread Left-Handed Darkness as well, and maybe read a third book that's kind of similar, and then process those together and really dive deeper into the themes rather than a surface level analysis. But for the purpose of this video, we're doing a surface level analysis of this book, The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. With all of that said, we'll get into non-spoilers. This is kind of similar to Left-Handed Darkness in the context of the universe. It's in the same series, if you count it as a series. It's kind of like how Cosmere is a series, even though they're not all connected. I'm kind of reading this franchise as the same. I can't remember. I think it's called the Hainish cycle. Pretty much, there are many variations of humans, but they are all defined as human intrinsically because it's from the human DNA strand. But in each series, we are seeing the humans differently. So in Left-Handed Darkness, there's a lot of major themes on gender and just the way that section of humanity appears and how they define their culture and everything based on what kind of humans they are, what group of humans they are. This book is kind of similar. We have another group of humans, and then we have the colonial part of humans, the people on the frontier that are being sent out to meet this other group of humans that is not part of the conglomerate, right? So with all of that context for this book, let's talk about major themes. There are two of the biggest. I don't think anyone would really disagree with me that these are the biggest themes, since they're pretty upfront the entire book. We have colonialism, significantly in this book, and we have climate. The name of the book itself kind of tells you the word for the world is forest. This kind of inherently a theme on climate, and it definitely gets mentioned. It's definitely not a typical climate book, I would say. If it's not necessarily what your first thought would be. I hope to try to explain in non-spoilers, but it might be in spoilers. But those are the two major themes that I feel I have to call out first. But followed by, I want to mention conflict, how a group is represented, um, the acts of an individual, like how an individual processes information and the actions an individual takes, and then also language. Again, the word for world is forest. There's definitely some discussion of language within this book as well. Um, so those are some of the major ones that I wanted to point out. There's definitely many more themes. But I think those were the ones that stood out to me reading this book. I mentioned earlier, it's a short story in the Hainish cycle, a lot shorter than Left Hand of Darkness. This you probably could read in like 1 to 2 days, even if I read it longer, because I've been pretty busy. Usually in non-spoilers, I talk about characters, world building, magic systems. So I am still going to do those things. It's a little bit different because it's a novel. Something I haven't mentioned yet that is pretty important to shout out is when this book was written. I believe this was published in 1972. Please feel free to fact check me on that. I'm trying to load it right now. If I can. Yeah, 1972 is when it was first published. So, just like Left Hand Darkness, very old book with some very meaningful themes still to this day, 100%. Every time, I've only read 2, but each of the Ursula K. Le Guin books I've read do not feel as old as they are. And I think in part that's because that really isn't that long ago, but in part is she is talking about some timeless topics. Hopefully not forever timeless, but at the moment they are. Getting into the characters, world building, magic. The characters in this story are very interesting. They are not lovable, I would say, not any of them, but they are all very distinct personalities, and the contrast between their personalities drives the majority of this book, actually. This, I think, one of the greatest powers of this book is how the characters are written, and just like they're very real. That's kind of what I've been appreciating about Robin Hobb recently, is how real the characters are. This book definitely gives them such strong personalities that definitely connect to real people that I know or have heard of, that really brings them to life in all 3 contexts. Whether they are part of the colonial humanity, like the larger group of humanity, or the local group of humanity, which are called Ascians in this book. All of them included in this case. So there's definitely representation. I wouldn't say like representation of like gender or whatever, but definitely representation of a colonializing group and a victim group for sure. But in all cases, like they're not very lovable characters. They're just people doing their thing. It's people doing what they think is right. And throughout the book, you're processing what each character thinks is right and how they approach their point of view of the world. So, I think that's what I have to say for characters right now. Suppose I'm trying not to like get too deep into characters because I'm doing a lot of that talk in spoilers. For the world building, we have a planet. I think it's just called is it just called Ascian? Is the name of the planet? Oh no, my memory is so bad. Athsh. Okay, I think it's just like Athshe. Is the name of the planet, and that word means forest. The word for world is forest. So there's definitely a huge emphasis in this book about the forest. There's pretty much the group that's deforesting, previously mentioned, colonizing. And then there's the group that lives in the forest, and pretty much we're at odds with that the entire book. So a lot of the world building is revolving the forest or the colonizing city. Those are pretty much like your 2 settings, right? And the Ascians have pretty much built their entire society around living in the forest. While the colonizing group, we don't have much context behind their background per se. They'll talk about Earth and how Earth is now pretty much like full of laws and completely covered and overpopulated, but like very restricting of rights. But we don't get much in the way of context for Earth itself, and also we don't know where the colonizing group came from before they got to Ash. I don't know how to say it. I'm sorry, but we definitely don't know if maybe they came from another planet that's been colonized. There's definitely a lot of colonized planets in this franchise, like the Hainish cycle. It definitely feels like there's thousands and thousands. So we don't really know where they came from, but we don't really need to know because we can kind of fill in that context ourselves in a way, however best fits your mind as the reader. It amounts to a lot of the same messages regarding the planet itself. There's people who refer to the planet as the forest, and there's people who just see it as a planet with resources. So I very much appreciate the world building. I also just love the concept of a planet covered in forests, except for some like bodies of water. Love the concept. It definitely gives a very unique setting and also a lot of like pretty much intrinsic themes as a result of it. Um, it adds a lot of meaning to the book, I think, rather than just like any setting, right? So those are some of my thoughts on the world building. And then as for magic, so all of this franchise is science fiction. I believe we talked about science fiction a bit in the previous one. Left-hand darkness. Oops. I don't know if you count like not to use a D&D term here, but like a racial feature in D&D. Don't really know if that counts as magic per se, but for this case, we will use like that as a concept just to explain to anyone who hasn't read any of Ursula K. Le Guin's books. These humans, they have an ability that all the colonizing humans do not have, and this happens in Left-Handed Darkness as well, regarding gender and some other things. And their ability is to dream, and pretty much their dream can be reality, or it can be a vision, or it can be, there's a lot of ways they dream, and there's the role of the men in society to dream, and there's a lot of world building around that as well, of how the Ashians built their society. But the dreaming is very interesting in this book. It doesn't really get a spotlight, so we don't recognize much of it. We don't actually learn much about it, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense for this book because two of the point of views are in the side of the colonizing humans, and they don't really understand it that well. Even the one that really tries to, it's a very vague concept to him. And then there's the Ascian main character, and he already knows what dreaming is, so he doesn't feel a need to explain it or relearn it, and it's very natural to him. So as a result of those being our 3 point of views, we don't really get a pretty detailed explanation of dreaming or what it means or what it does. And there's definitely some language there too, because the Ascians don't speak English traditionally. They learn English. The character in that side of the story learned English, whatever the common tongue is at this point in this world building, we don't know, but I'll just say common. While he's learned it, his ability to explain it in the common tongue is very difficult, or he struggles to explain what a dream is in common tongue. So dreams are definitely like a pretty important focus of this book in terms of the world building, but also they're not very strong. The presence isn't very strong in the book because it's usually mentioned for a section and then there's a lot of other things going on. So there's definitely a balance to it, but it adds some significant context to the book and it definitely contributes to the conflict in the book as well. So this sound? Oh, it's a motorcycle. Sorry. It definitely contributes to the conflict and adds to the context within the story and the world building. I think that's all I have for non-spoilers. In the spoilers, I'm gonna do a deep dive on each of the characters, all three of them, and share a few quotes. I have two quotes loaded up. I guess that's the last thing I'll say for non-spoilers. This book is very interesting in that it's so short. It doesn't have time to dive into a lot of additional themes other than the ones it's focusing on. That's something that all of us in the group read noticed. And there are definitely some very meaningful quotes in this book, but they don't have any backup to the quote. So I was thinking about like what quotes I could use for this video, and a lot of them I just can't quite use because it's a one-time mentioned thing. There's definitely some like very vague themes of how the colonists started using women, or a lot of that stuff, misogyny, and in a way, it's a very particular variation of misogyny that's like being on the frontier and what's the purpose of women, kind of. There's some very vague themes on like age, which is very interesting, but it doesn't go too far. Themes on communication or reporting or like military action, some other things. There's definitely like a lot of things that have like 1 to 4-ish quotes, but then don't really get mentioned again or don't get dived into, and that's particularly true for the Ashian culture. We don't get to learn too much of that culture, and there definitely could have been a lot more themes with that, but because it isn't there, we mostly get the harsh contrast between the main themes. So I don't know why I had the hiccups, I'm sorry. Uh, all of those things stand out, and going into spoilers, I'll be able to describe that in more detail, talking about the characters. So this is your time to leave, if you don't want spoilers, for The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. There's a very interesting cadence to that title. The Word for World is Forest. It sounds poetic to me, and I think I really appreciate that. I've been pretty big on poetry. I was going to say recently, but I mean, period. I've been pretty big on poetry most of my life. Um, so I kind of like. I love how this title feels to me. I think the title in and of itself holds a lot of meaning, and I always like when a book title is kind of impactful by itself before you even get into the book. It feels like it contributes more. All right, so getting into the characters. Going not in any particular order, let's start with the scientist. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Someone told me how to pronounce it, and it sounded French-like, and I already forgot it. Let's just say Lyubov. I know that's wrong. I apologize to whichever culture the name is from greatly. I'm largely going to refer to him as the scientist in this video because his background is, it's not even necessarily science. It is, but it isn't. It's kind of like, he walks a line of anthropology, science, and just, I guess, political analysis. He's just an overall emissary, I suppose you could say. His job is to analyze the locals and report back. That is his job within the society. So he has a very interesting point of view where he's trying to bridge the gap between working for the colony but wanting to make a connection with the Ashians and like get close to them and learn their habits. As a result of being part of the colony, he falls into a lot of the behaviors and habits of the colony. So we know that he sleeps with one of the women who's like dropped off for the locals to be with. That's pretty much what the purpose that they are dropped off for, which is dystopian in and of itself, in my opinion. Um, very again like one of those like poignant themes that like comes in and then isn't really mentioned until like way later again. But we know that he does that, and he generally tries to like suck up to a lot of the other people in the colony, and he was like okay with using the Atsians as slaves, which also I don't know why I didn't say major theme of slavery. I kind of grouped slavery and colonialism together at the beginning of this video. Slavery. He originally got the other character, the Astian character Selver, as one of his slaves, and was pretty comfortable with that. He was trying to like make a working relationship with Selver when he was that, but at the same time, that definitely doesn't make it any less true that Selver was a slave in that relationship. And you could see how this character, the anthropology scientist character, is rationalizing his interactions the entire book. He definitely feels that he's doing the right thing in those contexts of like trying to understand the local language and starting to understand protecting the forest versus like focusing on supporting the mission to deforest the planet. But he definitely walks a line. So while he, okay, I realize these are two separate thoughts. Let me finish the previous one. He's rationalizing and justifying the position he is in. And to use the phrase that the people at the book club used, which was very brilliant and I did not come up with, he kind of plays a white savior role in this book and is very, very interesting to think about this book in that context. You pretty much have the white savior character, you have the super, super, super problematic character. Don't worry, we will talk about him, but very direct, problematic, causing the problem character. And then you have Selver, who is the slave is trying to get revenge character as well. So you definitely there's one hell of a contrast between these three pretty much immediately. But if you really contextualize his point of view in that way, rather than just like someone in between Selver and Davidson is the name of the other guy. If you contextualize him in that way, rather than like as just a character in between that spectrum, it really changes how he reads. And I think that's something I noticed. After they mentioned that, I reread it a bit, and I was like, yeah, for sure. So he definitely has a very interesting presence, and a very strong connection with the other two characters. Davidson hates him, like passionately hates the man. And there's some, slight themes on like masculinity as a result of that. Again, doesn't get mentioned that often, but both Davidson and Lyubov himself both kind of describe Lyubov as like kind of feminine or very in touch with his like emotions and not able to well, he's definitely able to detach himself from things, but the way Davidson describes it is that Lyubov is always like clinging to but what if, and not taking action. We'll definitely talk about that theme, taking action, more later. But there's kind of a perceived conflict between industry and like industry wanting to make progress, and then the research or whatever other group, the ethics group or whatever, delaying progress by doing an ethical analysis. And so Lyubov kind of represents like the ethics group in this case, but again, I say that in quotes because he is a white savior role, and there's a lot of additional context that comes with that. But between the three characters, he serves as like the one delaying Davidson's goals. Meanwhile, Davidson is trying to progress his goals as much as he can. So there's definitely conflict between those two characters. And then Selver and Lyubov, also very interesting because Selver was previously a slave for him, but they had a close enough working relationship that he doesn't hate him, and Lyubov, in a way, saved Silver's life. Pretty much some shit went down. Silver's wife was killed by Davidson. Also, conflict between those characters intrinsically as a result of that. I'm probably misusing the word intrinsically. I'm sorry, but I've done a lot of talking today. Sorry. His wife was killed by Davidson. He attacks Davidson. He was going to be executed as a result of doing that, but Lyubov pretty much like kept him away from the rest of the colonists and then released him. And that's part of why Davidson hates Lyubov as well, but also his general career and goals and their just point of views do not align at all. So again, this is what I was saying by like there's such a heavy contrast between these characters, but also very strong relationships between them. And I think that it drives a lot of the story and a lot of the themes as a result. Let me think if there's anything else to say about Lyubov before we move on to Davidson. I feel like I gotta get the elephant out of the room. Davidson is one hell of a character to follow in a story. I cannot think of any characters that the point of view has followed that's anything like Davidson in any other series I have read. I guess the closest would be like Taravangian in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere series. But it's not even like that. Taravangian's like, cold and smart. If you know the character, you know. He's brutal, but he's very intelligent. Davidson, yeah, I've just not read a character like Davidson. So Davidson has a very distinct point of view of the world. He is very, at least internally, vocal about what is important, what is success, what needs to be done, and who is in his way and who agrees with him. Sorry if you could hear people in the parking lot. Davidson, right off the bat, page 1, you know that women are objects for him to use. First thing you learn about him, pretty much immediately. And he's so excited about it. And then you find out that he really loves having a gun, and part of the reason why he came to this planet to work with the deforesting is so he can have his gun rights. You learn that he enjoys killing things occasionally. He enjoys... I don't want to use that word on this channel. Let's just say assaulting. Various flavors of assaulting. The slaves that he has under him, which right at the beginning of the book, he's kind of the head of a town and running a bunch of slaves, and he has several slaves. Has done many things to many slaves. So pretty much like right at the start of the book, you learn women from his colony are just something for him to use. Slaves are something for him to use. He loves having his gun. He enjoys killing things and will kill the slaves when he finds it necessary. Immediately describes the slaves as animals that are lower down like rats, not like anything human. So pretty much like you come into this book, if you've read Left Hand of Darkness or any of the other Heinrich Cycle series, you come into this book knowing that Astians are humans. Davidson, right at the beginning of this book, is immediately describing them as animals or rats, not humans. And that's an immediate discrepancy of he is definitely not seeing this group of people as anywhere near his level. And he's constantly talking about them being pretty much cattle for him to slay. And there's no ethical... He has no ethical problems at all with anything to do with it. But it's definitely strange. Like, you can't even say they're necessarily treated exactly like animals because of the assault factor. That doesn't really happen with animals. So they're like they're treated a little bit human, like just enough human to have intimacy with, but not any more than that. Um, it is definitely one hell of a dynamic to pretty much jump into right at the start of the book. And I think that is part of what makes this powerful right off the bat is that you start in Davidson's point of view, which has a very direct, harsh, harsh from my point of view, opinion and perspective. So right off the bat, that's what you learn about this character. Some of the things I want to highlight about this character, he definitely measures masculinity, at least from how I read it, which I'm obviously biased because gender things, but um, he definitely has a measure of like, this is what makes me look good. This is how I should behave to be a like man, a human man. And that's part of how the femininity discussion came up earlier. Like women can't do this. That scientist Lyubov, who's like crying or whatever, like he isn't a man. The phrase that Davidson often uses is traitor. So anyone who's not like a realist like Davidson, he also describes himself as a realist, which is, you know, a very significant phrase to use. There's a lot of people who describe themselves as realists and then kind of use as a justification to do terrible things. Davidson does that. So that's definitely a very real topic that Ursula K. Le Guin touched on there. Um, all of this is really. But he describes anyone who gets in the way of not even necessarily the industry. Davidson definitely cares about like the industry progressing and doing the deforestation and those things, but it's kind of about him to a degree. It's about his point of view that they get to have guns and they get to have power over these things. And if anyone tries to interrupt that power dynamic, then they are a traitor to humankind. Humankind has every right to be the one in power, and anything that challenges that, or anyone, even humans, that challenge that are traitors or are not trustworthy. There's a very brief stint where there's communication back to Earth, and Earth says, you cannot do anything to the slaves. You like pretty much like lays down some like ethical rules, and Davidson is livid. He refuses to believe that Earth would do that and that they could have changed that much in that many years, which I think he was talking about like, I don't remember the exact number, like 35 years, some amount of years, which is definitely enough for a lot of things to change based on our modern world. But he's like, they can't have changed that much. Like, they can't be like all those traders. There must be like someone like faking it. And so he started picking out some of the other colonized human groups. There's some groups of humans from various planets that are included in the colonizing group in this book. So, like, people whose planets had been colonized are included. He starts blaming a bunch of them. So he's being racist to the other parts of humankind as an explanation for why there would be ethical discussion or like just rules in general. He's very much not a rule follower or just anti-rules, anti-establishment in a way. And that kind of goes hand in hand with themes of being on the frontier, the old like Wild West themes of how people very much value freedom when it was time to go west. And they justified a lot of the treatment of people as like it's the frontier. So you get to have more lax, I guess, morals. I'm not thinking of the words right now, but pretty much like a lot more lax with justifications of what you are doing. And there's definitely an emphasis on this where Davidson, if this were a wild like a story of moving west, Davidson would fit right in with that crowd, with those main characters. I could keep talking about this character forever. I won't lie. Like there's a lot to talk about this character. I think one of the most important things that I want to emphasize about this character throughout this entire book is his ability to convince himself of something. I definitely know some people like this in real life, and combining, that ability with this man's point of view makes one hell of a character. Um, Anytime he is confronted with something that goes against his belief, or anytime he's confronted with something that challenges his power, his position, he finds some way to reorient and justify it so that it didn't happen, or so that it actually worked out in his favor. And it's just his rationalization throughout this entire book is fascinating and very, very, very well written on Ursula K. Le Guin's part. It feels very genuine. It feels very human, and by default. Um, but I mean, there's a lot of things I could point out. Towards the beginning of the book, Selver like tackles him and sings over him, like singing, which is a cultural thing for Astians. Um, Davidson cannot recognize that for the life of him, and he pretty much, even though like he gets in the helicopter and like kind of runs away, he reorients his whole point of view to be the savior and be the one who like is like going to tell word to the human to his point of view, humankind, um, and like he's gonna like really go get them, and nothing's his fault, etc., etc., etc. Like he pretty much instantly has this full rationalization of what happened and sticks to it. Later, he doesn't even stick to his own point of views. I think at the very end of the book, he's holding a gun to the guy flying the helicopter's head, the hopper's head. My throat is getting super dry. I'm gonna try to hurry up. He's holding a gun to the guy holding the hopper's head. The hopper crashes, and he keeps jumping point of view. So initially he doesn't have the light or whatever it is he was looking for. His gun and his light, I think, are both gone. Um, and so he immediately is like, "Fuck the guy who was in the hopper." Like he can't even, like, he stole my light. He's a traitor to all of us, and he's the reason why I can't be successfully wiping out the species, right? Um, and so like that's his first thought. And then he sees a light in the distance, and then he's like, "Oh man, that's like brilliant! Like he was smart enough to get out of the helicopter and is already going ahead. What a smart guy!" And then finds him dead on the ground, and it's like, "You dumbass! Like how could you have fucked this up so bad?" So like within like one paragraph, he jumps between those three rationalizations and doesn't seem to notice it himself. Like he is 100% unaware of the fact he's doing it and doesn't address it. He's pretty much 100% convinced of whatever he sees the world around him to be. So I think that is super, super fascinating with this book and very topical right now from my point of view. And what the one of the people in my book club said that is also very interesting to think about is, again, action. I mentioned it earlier. Because Davidson has this point of view of the world around him, he takes action on his beliefs. Because he has those beliefs and pretty much has no hesitation that he is in the right, he is always the character taking action in the story. Lyubov is kind of the opposite. He's kind of a pacifist in a weird way. A pacifist in like how silence is complicity. Whole thing could go on and on about that. But he's a pacifist and doesn't take any particular action, except the one time he can take action, he just does what he would have done. He pretty much does the opposite. He just doesn't take action, and it results in action. There's a whole other thing. Davidson is constantly taking action. He, including like action against all of the orders and rules that he's been told to do. So he's the one who's pretty much like inciting all the violence and conflict in the story in a way. At the end of the day, it all loops back to Davidson, even if Selver himself initiates some of it. Selver is very interesting because he Do we know that Silver's gender is he? I guess so. I think everyone says he. Um, Silver's very interesting in that he definitely causes some of the violence, pretty much releasing the slaves and killing a bunch of humankind the first time, um, as to get revenge for his wife being killed. Real. Uh, but he's not very happy about it. He's very unhappy with doing that, and you can tell throughout the story that he wants to minimize killing, and he starts like capturing humans instead of killing humans. But then Davidson keeps attacking the locals because he thinks it's wrong that his higher ups have told him that he can't do that. And so he's like, well, I'm just going to have to do it myself. And so he starts pretty much creating his own coup, uprising, rebellion group, um, to keep doing it without like anyone knowing. But Silver and his people know, and so they feel it is just to do another attack onto humankind, and they kill all of the women. Which quick side note here. I swear I'm going to try to wrap this up, but a quick side note about killing all the women. Humankind seems so deeply upset with that happening, right? Because it's like women are like the one group of people you don't attack. I mean, that's still a concept that is being taught now. It's like you don't kill women and children, you can only kill the men. If you tell me that's not a thing right now, in my mind, it is. So women, the women are killed by Silver's group, and the humans bring that up multiple times. Both Davidson and all the captured humans like bring it up. From Silver's point of view, he's like, I had to stop you all from continuing this problem, and this led to the communication that needed to happen. And so he has a justification for it, but you can tell he's also unhappy with it as well. Um, and so he definitely has this balance of he's taking action, but he pauses in his action to like consider what he's doing occasionally, and he does analyze what he has done. One of the very last lines in the book, which is very significant, is hold on, I'll even read it out. Sometimes the god comes and he brings a new way to do things or a thing to be done, a new kind of thinking or a new kind of death. He brings this across the bridge between dream time and real world time, and the world time. When he has done this, it is done. You cannot take things that exist in the world and try to drive them back into the dream, to hold them inside the dream with walls or pretenses. That is insanity. What is, is. There's no use pretending now that we do not know how to kill one another. So pretty much Selver's mission in this book, or his journey that he goes through, causes his kind to learn murder, to learn killing each other. Before then, it was not something that they did, period. Which is a very, very, very fascinating theme in and of itself. A society that doesn't have violence or killing one another or attacking one another. Fascinating. But his journey throughout this book brings that to his people. And you can see the varying reactions and how he is very uncomfortable recognizing what he has done that will forever affect his people. So very, very, very fascinating concept and brings a lot of power to his character. So not only is he on a very justified arc of having gone through all the things he went through, his wife being killed and assaulted, and groups of his people being like wiped out, and his home. Pretty much, again, his culture believes that the forest is the world. That is pretty much their home inherently, and this group is coming in and deforesting it, taking away the forest from them. And so there's a lot going on there, but also there's a lot of themes regarding like his culture and how he's impacting his own culture, even aside from the colonists. The presence of the colonists causes it, but he is, in a way, in a way, the one driving it as well. So pretty much leading rebellion. I guess that comes back to the themes of leadership, being a leader and how that impacts the people following you. All of that's very relevant to Silver as well. So yeah, that is a bunch of the themes. Again, there are many, 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 many more. So many more. Can't even begin to get to all of them. There's some, I wish I could talk more about like Silver's um, people or culture, but there really isn't a lot of mention of it. A lot of his journey is centered around his character, and while there's like a few others here and there, they just give like little snippets of information, but not enough to really do a deep dive in on. Uh, as I said before, there's many, many, many more themes. These are just a bunch of the ones that I am able to get out in the session. Okay, I think I'm done with spoilers. So we get into what's new and what is next. So having finished this, my book club is trying to select the next book. We have not yet. If y'all are curious, I propose we read Spear, which I've read before on this channel, and that we read A Dead Jinn in Cairo, which is one of the novellas leading up to Master of Jinn, which I wanted to read before. I definitely multiple times the channel said I would read Master of Jinn, but then I found out that there are novellas that are advised to be read beforehand, so I never did. So I propose that maybe we read that for the book club. I don't think it's likely that we'll select those. We will definitely see going forward what book is selected. In the meantime, I am still reading Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I am, I believe, 55% through the book. I paused for more than a month. I think like a month and a half to 2 months, really. I was kind of stuck at like 25, 30%. And then I sat down and made it to 55%. And now life is getting busy again. I've moved and I'm doing a lot of applications and work and a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on in my life. So I'm slowly working on Assassin's Quest, but I don't really have a timeline. It's kind of up in the air. Something I do want to mention with this video, there will be another video released. That video has been privately on my channel for quite some time, more than a month for sure. I finished that book earlier this summer. However, my person who makes my thumbnails had some delays. We'll just say that. And so I kept being like, oh, I'll make it public when I get a thumbnail. But then it like kept being delayed, and then it reached the point where it's kind of awkward. So I've been waiting for this video so that I can do that. So hopefully both these videos will be released together. And then there's two from this summer, two books I've read this summer. I will say that oh, I just realized something I forgot to say, but it's fine. I will say that I am already like kind of meeting my book goal for this year. I think I'm at 11 out of 12, so that's great. I'm 3 books ahead of schedule, Goodreads says. So finally reaching the book goal. It's been a while since I've done that, so good news. But yeah, I don't really know what else I will read. I want to focus on finishing Assassin's Quest, and then I really have to decide if I am going to be reading all of Realm of the Elderlings. The plan is to do so, but that seems like a lot of energy. The good news is Assassin's Quest is the largest book, but it definitely still could be a lot. I do still need to finish Sea of Tranquility when I have the chance. We'll see when I get to that. And I also need to read Frugal Wizard. A lot of people recommended that book, or didn't recommend that book. They recommended that I skip that book. And that's part of why I haven't read it now. And that's part of why I'm kind of not always open to being told what not to do. I'm very open to being told what books to read. But tell me what books not to read definitely impacts what I would have felt for the book before that was mentioned, for sure. So I can get it sometimes, but not always. So that is where we're at. So I hope you all have a good one. I'll see you whenever I read next book. Bye bye.